Thank you. Now, our next congressional panel member is Congressman Frank Guinta, who is serving his second term representing residents of New Hampshire. He is a founding member of the Bipartisan Task Force to Combat the Heroin Epidemic, and he is a member of the House Congressional Caucus on Prescription Drug Abuse. He also co-sponsored the Stop Abuse Act of 2015 to strengthen local treatment, prevention, and law enforcement programs. Congressman?
Thank you and good morning. About a year ago, when I entered my second term into Congress, never did I think that a 45-year-old guy from New Hampshire would unfortunately become an expert in heroin use and opioid abuse. But my heart is in this fight because it's a fight worth fighting. Those lives that we seek to help are people, not statistics. And it's in that vein that I have put my time in Congress directed toward this epidemic. And I am an optimist. I believe that we can and will succeed. And evidence of that are organizations like this one, gatherings like this week, and people's leadership like my colleagues in both the House and the Senate, as well as my thanks and appreciation to Chairman Rogers for his leadership and dedication. So I am honored to participate in this event and joining with these leaders because in my small home state of New Hampshire, 1 out of every 3,000 Granite Staters last year died of a heroin or related overdose. And that's a trend, unfortunately, that thrusted our state into national recognition and spotlight during the presidential primary process. As a matter of fact, I challenged each and every presidential candidate on both sides of the aisle to come up with a plan and solution should they assume the office of the presidency. And I was glad to see that President Obama was here yesterday, highlighting the importance of this issue, including in the first 10 seconds of his State of the Union, where he referenced this issue as a national epidemic. The 1 out of 3,000 in New Hampshire represents 428 people, countless thousands of overdoses, people that matter, people that need someone fighting for them, people who need assistance. But New Hampshire is not alone. Communities around the nation are struggling to find ways to help those in need and punishing those individuals for peddling this harmful drug. Unfortunately, Narcan is now available in many schools. I'm a father of a 12 and an 11-year-old. And while I'm not sure how I feel about that need as a parent, I understand the obligation that we have to do everything we can to even save one life. However unfortunate that situation might be in the world of a 7th or an 8th grader. As many you know, this is a difficult and complicated issue and involves not just comprehensive solutions that span from law enforcement to expanding treatment, but also long-term recovery and drug or recovery courts. As a co-sponsor of the bill, I'm pleased to have joined my colleagues to urge leadership in the House of Representatives to pass the Comprehensive Addiction and Recovery Act. And given Chairman Rogers' interesting quote this morning, "A bill without funding is a hallucination," I feel pretty good about the opportunities that we have in the House to pass and fund that legislation. Of course, you know it passed the Senate 94-1, and while I am hopeful that it goes through the regular process in Washington, we already did approve last year, as Chairman Rogers mentioned, some $500 million in some new programs and additional programs within DOJ, an important first step toward the efforts that we all care about. To that end, Representative Ann Custer, my colleague from New Hampshire, Don Norcross, and Jim Sensenbrenner have led the letter to address the Appropriations Committee calling on funding for these programs authorized in CARA. And nearly 60 other members have joined in signing that letter. You do have friends, you do have advocates, you do have fighters who are championing this issue along with our Chairman Rogers. But there is a lot more work to be done. Last October, Representative Ann Custer and I started the Bipartisan Task Force to combat the heroin epidemic, something I had hoped wouldn't be necessary, but now 70 different members of Congress have joined that task force, and we expect to add more in the coming months because they care, because they understand the complexities of the issue, and they see the challenges that they have in their communities and in their districts. We've held 3 hearings already that brought leaders from several government agencies to discuss this growing problem. And the goals of the hearing is not just to understand the complexities of the issue, but what we can do as members of Congress to continue to combat the fight against heroin and opioid use. And understanding the complexity of this issue is about as crucial as possible. Not just passing the CARA Act, but hopefully the Stop Abuse Act that I authored late last year. We have to deal with things like pain management. We need to deal with new regulatory requirements at the federal level. And while I commend the U.S. Food and Drug Administration for announcing enhanced warnings detailing the dangers of opioid pain medication, they've got to move quicker and faster and be more nimble, because people around the country need help immediately, need help today. We have to have a government that can be quicker and faster and recognize the challenges that we face. In a small state like New Hampshire, it's far too easy to travel across state lines to Massachusetts or Maine or Vermont and get a prescription filled. For instance, I've seen people who get a prescription filled in New Hampshire, go across state lines, get that same prescription filled by a different physician, and no one is the wiser. And that prescription either ends up in a medicine cabinet or being sold on the street. It's expanding the drug dealer's opportunity for a new patient, but it's hurting our ability to help those who are vulnerable and in need. So we do need enhanced the PDMP program. We're working on that in New Hampshire, and we need to have it mandatory in all 50 states to make sure that we stop the problem from the beginning. And was mentioned earlier by Chairman Rogers, $400 million was appropriated last year to DOJ. I'm visiting the border next month to see how the illegal heroin is coming across the southern border and traveling throughout the country. That has to be a component. We need to deal with the supply side as well as dealing with the demand side. And that means putting drug cartels in jail to the fullest extent that the law allows, but helping the individual who unfortunately becomes addicted through a drug and recovery court treatment process and helping them reintegrate into life. I want to end on a more optimistic note. While there have been so many countless deaths, so many of us have engaged with individuals who have unfortunately lost their battle. There is somebody in New Hampshire that I continue to think about on a daily basis. A young lady that I met late last year. Her name is Abby Lazat. You may have seen her on different news programs featured around the nation. She presented to a hospital late last year, pregnant, days away from death, because she was addicted to heroin. And the only reason she presented was none of her friends or her family would take her in anymore because she was stealing from them, using heroin on a regular basis. She thought that she was days away from death. And thankfully, a nurse took her to a hospital because Abby had her cell phone number in her pocket. And they presented, they went to the hospital, and she is now, the last time we spoke, 130 days clean and has a beautiful 6-month-old. Abby is someone worth fighting for, and the people around this nation who are abusing and addicted to heroin and opioids are also worth fighting for. And I think the expression on this dais today is a reflection not of the partisanship that you see in Washington, but of the good that can come out of working together. And people like Chairman Rogers and his leadership allows us to continue that fight, to continue that effort. And I look forward to joining you and my colleagues in making sure that we provide the necessary federal tools and resources to not just reduce this problem, but eliminate and eradicate this problem. Thank you all very much, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.